Now, Washington Mornings on the Mall. 105.9 FM. And AM 630. WMAL.
7:37 on WMAL. Good Tuesday morning. Brian Neiman, Brian Wilson here with you in Washington, D.C. By the way, coming up next hour, Larry Kudlow from CNBC will join us. We're also scheduled to have D.C. Councilman Jim Graham on the program. We'll talk to him about the battle between the cabbies and Uber. Talk once again of a commuter tax in D.C. and the latest debacle for the NFL and the replacement refs. What happened last night on Monday Night Football. Unbelievable. But a big speech today by President Obama at the United Nations. Pleased to have David Lee Miller, correspondent for the Fox News Channel, who's covering the UN today for Fox. David, good morning. How are you?
Hey, David. How are you?
Good morning, gentlemen. Good to be with you this morning. We're outside the United Nations right now, awaiting the arrival of the president.
Explain to us the schedule of events, what's going to happen today, when the president is going to speak, and maybe an idea of what he's going to say today.
Well, the president's scheduled to speak precisely at 10 minutes after 10 o'clock to open the General Assembly, and the laundry list of topics is pretty obvious stuff. He's expected to speak at length about Syria, the ongoing violence there, likely to touch on the Iran nuclear issue, the attack on the consulate in Benghazi that took the life of our ambassador there. And, of course, he's also expected to talk about the controversial anti-Muslim flame that has caused rioting throughout the Middle East and parts of Asia.
David, of course, there are so many topics out there that are on our foreign policy. What's the
horizon?
Horizon right now. Thank you very much.
Anytime.
It's sort of surprising that the President of the United States is not staying but just a few minutes to deliver the speech and leaving. The last time he went, I think he had 13 bilateral meetings with world leaders. What about that?
That's right. The president has come under a great deal of criticism, not for the speech he's about to give, but for the lack of face-to-face meetings that will not take place. As you're very right, last year he had about 13 bilats with world leaders. This time around, no face-to-face meetings, and adding fuel to the fire here for his critics. Instead, he has found the time during his stay in New York to pre-tape an interview with the ladies of the View television show. That was taped last night, and that interview is going to be broadcast this morning. Another thing to keep in mind, Brian, and this is interesting, is that to some extent there are dueling speeches this morning.
Right.
Mitt Romney is going to be speaking at 9 o'clock Eastern Time at the Clinton Global Initiative. The president speaks at 10:10, an hour later, just across town. So both men could be speaking at the same time, addressing some of the same subjects a few blocks apart, but in very different forms.
And at the same time, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is in town. Now, he's going to give a speech at some point, but he's already been talking to reporters, and some of the things that he's said has been described by the State Department as sort of reprehensible.
I think reprehensible would be a very gentle way of describing his remarks. He wasted no time yesterday telling reporters what he thought about Israel. He met with a number of them at a breakfast meeting at his hotel in New York. He said that Israel has no roots in the Middle East. He said that Iran can defend itself against who he called the Zionists. And then he came over to the United Nations, and he delivered a speech, having a conference here on the rule of law. But he used this opportunity to further attack Israel, attack the United States, and he also attacked the United Nations while standing at the United Nations using their podium. He said that the Security Council veto of the United States and other countries was unfair and was being used to violate Iran's interests. In the speech yesterday, it was also interesting because he didn't mention Israel by name, but it was abundantly clear who he was talking about when he talked about occupied land and a fake regime having nuclear capability.
I'm talking with David Lee Miller, who's covering the UN for Fox News. You were talking about dueling press conferences or dueling speeches. I guess it is also possible if something happens with the president's timing of the speech today where he could be giving the speech to the UN while being on The View at the same time.
I hadn't thought
because
about
it was taped last night. It's probably going to air. It's going to air at 11 o'clock, I believe,
like that,
East Coast as well.
If we let our imaginations run amok And you could have a three-way split screen. If the timing goes off today, for whatever the reason, you could have Romney in one corner, the president in the other at the UN, and then you could have the president on The View all at the same time. But I don't really see that happening, but anything is possible.
Right. Meanwhile, Iran has test-fired missiles which are designed, I guess, to hit warships. And they did this while Ahmadinejad is in New York and while he is saying that Israel, without mentioning Israel, should be eliminated. So, he continues.
That's a coincidence, right?
Yeah, I mean, they continue to be provocative. And, you wonder, is there any ever talk at the UN of just saying, we're not going to allow this guy to come? We're just not going to allow him to come to New York, not allow him to come to the UN?
No, that's a slippery slope, as you know. I mean, as much as many world leaders also find him a detestable character, if you prevent one world leader from speaking, you can do that to another, and then you've opened up a can of worms. So I think it's best I think the view here, not my position, let him speak, say what he wants, and keep it in context. Most world leaders do recognize who he is and what he represents.
Yeah, David, you're an experienced foreign correspondent. You've been all over the world. You've been in some of the toughest spots that are imaginable. Can you remember a time where things were this chaotic in the Mideast?
Not in recent memory. In my experience, it just seems like you've got a perfect storm of trouble here. The Arab Spring isn't going as predicted. You have Syria that's still bubbling over. Iran's nuclear ambitions, and then you also have the Israeli Prime Minister's desire for red lines to be drawn, and the U.S. not willing to do that at this time. And some have accused the Israeli Prime Minister of trying to parachute himself into the U.S. political fray.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you.
So it's extremely complex, and the problems in the Middle East extend far beyond that region. And I think it could make a difference when we pick a president here in November. What Mr. Netanyahu has said, I think undoubtedly is going to influence some voters, and it could play a role in who the next president of the United States will be.
Couldn't agree more, and yet we're not going to have any bilateral meetings today.
All right, David, good to have you on. Thanks very much for your time. David Lee Miller covering the UN for Fox News.